Stephen, I was trying to go through this the other day. Do you know the 7 points that they raised, and you kind of went through and said, oh, that person, not focused on that. I was going to try and add in, work on this, which adds in sort of the linking policies.
Okay, so we'll go, yeah.
So maybe later on we can
do that at the end of the day, yeah. You all right?
How are you?
Good, yeah. Just doing the round.
Yeah, why not? Yeah. Yeah, which of the leads? Oh, that's the point, Stephen. Be careful, my lead is kind of hanging hard across the air here.
Okay.
How are you going over?
You okay?
Yeah, it's popping here.
Oh, right.
Save for tea. Save for tea. I didn't want to put anything on the site. Someone might just get around. I'll do it at the same time.
morning rebutting air pollution, where he says it's not well organisation, but we have to worry about its death rate. And don't worry about idling traffic because they're going to put into a truck.
Oh yeah, that was good. I liked it.
Is it right?
That's our case, and these are
Yeah, thank you.
stuff that Guy handed over the weekend.
I think I thought I'd have a chance to read it.
We'll just go in 15, I think about it in 15 minutes.
They
But,
said about our case.
You might get going away.
And then you've got flooding.
race through.
It's working our way through.
What order we can talk?
Do something like that. I can't something like so long. Feels like we're stretching it out going any day.
Well, we're not. I mean, I'd be surprised if we do. It'd be nice to have this week.
No, it's spare.
That's what good.
Right at the beginning, we saw 4 or 5 days.
Yeah. First one, you always get the most thing. With the MP, yeah.
Because, I mean, the committee night, honestly, it was like 100 people.
Yeah.
Packed to the rafters, the whole night. Had to have overflow rooms. So I think,
Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock and this inquiry is open. First of all, can I check that everyone can hear me, that the PA system is working? Can you indicate at the back that you can hear me all right? Excellent, thank you. If at any point during proceedings you can't hear me or can't hear the person that's speaking, then please let me know. My name is David Nicholson, and I was appointed by the Secretary of State, who at the time was for Communities and Local Government. I believe informally that he's now the Minister for Housing, Communities and Local Government, but no doubt that will be confirmed in due course. Could I ask everyone with a mobile device to ensure that it doesn't ring while the inquiry is sitting? Are there any fire drills planned for today?
No, so there are no fire drills planned.
No fire drills. I can see one fire escape route, which is straight ahead of me. Are there any others?
The other fire escape route is if you to go through that door there, sir, and turn left, there's another exit there. But that's the main way out. And the assembly point would be in the car park, which is to the left as you go out, as you leave the building.
That's very helpful, thank you. Now, this is an inquiry into an application that has been called in for determination by the Secretary of State under Section 77 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990. It's made by Thornset Group plc and Purley Baptist Church for demolition of the existing buildings on 2 sites, erection of 3 to 17-storey building with basements comprising 114 flats, community and church space and a retail unit on the island site, and a 3 to 8-storey building comprising 106 flats on the south site, and public realm improvements with associated vehicular accesses, all at Purley Baptist Church and Hall, that's here, Banstead Road, 1 to 4 Russell Hill Parade, Russell Hill Road, 2 to 12 Brighton Road, and 1 to 9 Banstead Road, all here in Purley. First of all, I'd like to know who's here. Who speaks for the applicant? please. I shall say appellant and apologies when I do.
Indeed so, sir. And applicants plural as well.
Indeed.
So I do. So I know you've got a sheet in front of you of who we are, but just to say it in public. So my name is Christopher Katkowski. That's spelled Katkowski, Queen's Counsel. I'll be appearing with my learned friend, Mr. Andrew Bias, who's sitting over my left shoulder of counsel. So, and as you'll know from the sheet, we're instructed by Mr. Paul Thompson, solicitor's firm Temple Bright. And so in due course, I intend to call the following witnesses, and they're set out on the sheet, but I'll be calling the Reverend James Collins, who will deal with the church and community aspects of the proposals, Mr. Andrew Matthews, who is a scheme architect, who will deal with architecture and design, Mr. Jeff Noble, who will deal with townscape and heritage matters, Mrs. Victoria Balbao, who will deal with transportation, highways issues. And so on the list, you'll see that we have potentially a witness to deal with flood risk issues, as those have been raised by the Rule 6 party. And then I will be calling a planning witness, Mr. Rob Pearson. So that's the list of who we are. So.
Thank you. Tom, is Mr. Cunningham, the director, here today?
Yes.
Good to know. Thank you. Right, for the Local Planning Authority.
Sir, good morning. That is me. You also have a note of my appearances, as do the Rule 6 parties. So for the benefit of others in the room, my name is Stephen Morgan. I am a barrister and I'm instructed by Mr. Sean Murphy, who's the head of commercial and property law of the London Borough of Croydon. So you have the details there and you probably have them on file. With regard to the witnesses that we will be calling in due course, there are 3, sir. You have proofs from them and summaries from them. They are all officers of the London Borough of Croydon. And the 3 witnesses are Vincent Lacovera, who is the placemaking team leader in the council, and he'll be dealing with urban design and heritage matters. Mr. Ronald Burton, senior transportation planner, dealing with transportation matters. And finally, James White, who was the case officer, and he'll be covering the relevant planning matters and the overall assessment of the proposals.
Thank you. And who's here from the residents' associations, please? Now, can you use the microphone? Thank you very much.
My name is Dennis King. I'm chairman of Sanderstead Residents Association, and I'm a chartered architect.
And who do you have with you to...
Right. Thank you very much. I'm Charles King. I'm chair of East Coulson.
Sorry, can you say that a bit more slowly, please?
I'm Charles King. I'm chair of East Coulson Residents Association. I'm also chair of what I'd call East Surrey Transport Committee, which is the local user group for public transport in the Croydon and Sutton and East Surrey area. I think that will do for now.
And are you two related at all?
No, not at all.
Well, we won't go into that. And finally.
I'm Diane Hearn. I'm a member of the Hartland District Residents Association.
Thank you.
I'm Phil Thomas. I'm from Riddlesdown Residents Association, and I'm a retired chartered building surveyor.
And could I just add that we're actually representing 7 of the local residents' associations.
Indeed. Now, I have a list of 32 other people who've said they wish to speak, and I'll read these out. Steve O'Connell, Kevin Williams, Councillor Jeet Baines, Bill McElroy, Jeff Hunt, Councillor Lynn Hale, Laura Stringer, Ben Gershon, Badger Kadir, Donald Speakman, Enid Allen, Steve O'Connell, Jui Hussan Tang, Philip Gibson, Councillor Tim Pollard, Chris Wright, Councillor Yvette Hopley, Mike Rodwell, Margaret Levy, Margaret Bird, Susan Marinakis, Miles McCarthy, Dennis King, who I've already heard from, so that's useful, Lee Cooper, Luke Clancy, Jan Stollery, John Clark, Alan Speed, Alan Bates, Simon Cripps, Graham Bass, Alan Torrey and Chris Philp MP. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Yes, gentleman there. Richard Shakespeare. And can you tell me, do you represent anyone? Do you live locally, and do you wish to speak in support or opposed? And thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay. Now, I've arranged for a programme officer, and Miss Amanda Payne, who's sitting just there, who's the Council's appeals officer but has had no dealings with this case, has kindly agreed to act as programme officer, so you may see us talking outside the inquiry. She will act as a point of contact for you in order to keep up to date with the progress of the inquiry. And she's kindly let me have her mobile number, which is 079 074 79823, but you can get that from her if you want to keep in touch with how the inquiry is progressing. Is the press here today? No? Okay. And have attendance sheets circulated?
So they have been put out, I believe. Yeah.
Sorry, someone's pointing at the back. You've got an attendance sheet. Right.
There's a lectern at the back of the
right.
at the back of the hall with attendance sheets on it. So yes.
Splendid. If someone could make sure that I get that back at the end of the day, please. Right. Now I've had copies of the letter notifying the inquiry, and the last count about some 450 letters in response. I've had a copy of the official press notice and letters notifying time and place. I know that there was some concern about this notification, and as a result, I gave the residents' associations a little more time to complete their representations. Is everyone now content that they've had a fair opportunity to present their case? Thank you. Now, proofs of evidence. I've received and read 5 proofs from the applicants, 3 from the council, and a joint statement from the 7 residents' associations. Have you all had copies of one another's proofs?
Yes.
Splendid.
So what I don't know, so while you're on documents, so is whether a response that we put in last week to the Rule 6 parties' detailed statement of case, whether that's actually made its way to you.
It has, yes.
Good.
Thank you. Has it made it back to the residents' associations as well?
Today.
Right. Okay. So, now turning to the statement of common ground, thank you for that, that's helpful, and the comments of the residents' associations are also helpful on that. Anything to add to it? Any further areas of agreement? Okay. Conditions, is there a final list of suggested conditions? There was the list in the officer's report.
Can you just give me one moment, sir?
Of course.
It's been updated.
I'll just explain while I was taking instructions that I shall put forward a list of suggested conditions, reasons for them, as part of my recommendations. It doesn't affect the decision of the Secretary of State. It's standard procedure for me to do that and to discuss the wording of those. Mr. Katkowski.
So I'm just going to ask the Council to explain where we are.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
So there has been an updated version of the conditions given to us. I think the updates relate to 4 conditions and changes in plan references in particular. Mr. White is just double checking the references, but they appear right, and once we've checked that, that can then be handed out and distributed.
Thank you. 2 points on conditions. First of all, it would help me if I could have a list of reasons as well. And secondly, if at the end of the inquiry someone could email them to the inspectorate, that would be very helpful. Next, turning to the planning obligation, that came through to me this morning. Is that the final draft? Subject to any
it is indeed
discussions?
the final draft, so yes.
Splendid. I'd like to, I'm happy for a signed and dated version to follow on after the inquiry.
Thank you, sir.
I don't mind that. And it would be helpful to perhaps have a discussion of the conditions and the 106 early in the inquiry, maybe this week.
Oh, yes, sir. Well, that's very helpful of you to suggest that, because obviously we are holding off from signing and sealing, so to speak, the section 106,
Yep.
just in case there are points which arise during that session. So presumably when you go through the timetable for the inquiry,
We'll work out a convenient.
we'll work out a convenient time for that, sir.
Splendid. Now, turning to the sitting times, there'll be short mid-morning and afternoon breaks and lunch for an hour, starting from around 1 o'clock. I shall ask advocates to find convenient breaks. I'll follow the normal inquiry procedure rules. I'll first identify what I consider to be the main issues before the inquiry and deal with procedural matters. I shall then give the opportunity for a short opening statement by each of the main parties. That's to say, the applicants, the council and the Residents' Association, if they wish to make one. This is a slightly unusual inquiry in that the applicants and the council are on the same side. I'll ask the applicants to give its evidence before the council, and we'll talk about where the Residents' Association evidence comes in a moment. But before this, it would help me if there could be a short presentation of the scheme, and I've given everyone notice of that, so that we can all understand exactly what's before me at this inquiry. Now, for each witness, the evidence will be subject to cross-examination. That's to say the witness can be asked questions by the opposing side and any interested person who plans to speak and is on the opposite side to the witness. The witness will then be re-examined to clarify any matters, and I may have some questions. Depending on the level of detailed questioning against the scheme, in order to fulfil my inquisitorial duty, I may need to ask some more probing questions than usual in order that the Secretary of State can be satisfied that the evidence has been properly tested. This shouldn't be taken to imply any particular stance on my part. The same will happen for witnesses of the Residents' Association, but we'll come to who that's going to be in a minute. I've set aside next Tuesday as the day when most interested persons opposed to the scheme will be heard. This will allow you to hear what each other says and hopefully avoid unnecessary repetition. Their evidence will be presented and subjected to cross-examination in the usual way, and I may also have some questions. After that, I've heard from all the witnesses. I'll hold a session dealing with the conditions and the obligations. As I've just mentioned, we may have an earlier discussion of that as well. If the Residents' Associations wish, they can sum up their case, followed by the council, and then the applicants can make theirs last of all. Before that, I would like to hold a site visit, and we can, during the inquiry, we can work out exactly what that consists of. Does anyone anticipate any procedural difficulties? Splendid. So, just a quick word on costs. As this inquiry relates to an application, the usual rules don't apply, though there could be a cost application over procedural matters. Any intentions to make one? Splendid.
Not as currently advised, no, sir.
Sorry?
Not as currently advised, no, sir.
Indeed. As I say, in turning to the site visit, I'd welcome an accompanied visit between evidence and the closing statements. It would help me if the parties could get together and work out where I need to go and roughly how long it would take to view those points. Help me to walk around this building and the other side of the road. Are there other viewpoints further afield that you'd like me to see the site from?
Could I suggest that you look from Purley Road, which is crossing the traffic junctions towards Purley Station, to where I can't remember who owns the building now, but it used to be the Royal Bank of Scotland, and you'll see
Right.
it. And you can look this direction, and you should also just look at the Brighton Road itself, where the existing infrastructure and architecture is. where the main shopping centre.
Perhaps you or one of your colleagues could accompany me on that bit.
Yep.
And if you could have a chat with someone on the opposing side, we could work out a logical route.
I think the best thing to do so is if we produce a plan, a map, and we can set the ball rolling by indicating where we think it would be sensible for you to go and have a walk.
That would be very helpful. And will you have a chat with Mr. King?
We'll circulate it, and
Splendid.
And the residents' associations can put whatever they like on the map as well, so of course.
Turning to the drawings, are the numbers as the Statement of Common Ground? Are those the final revision numbers?
As I understand it, sir, yes, there's a list of agreed drawings in the Statement of Common Ground.
So I now turn to what seem to me to be the main issues in this application. My provisional assessment of these as my pre-inquiry note is the consistency of the application with the development plan, including the London plan, its consistency with policies in the National Planning Policy Framework in requiring good design of the built environment in particular, its effect on the character and appearance of the area, the quality of its design with particular regard to its height and conformity with policy 7.7b of the London plan regarding tall buildings, its effect on heritage assets, its access arrangements with particular regard to pedestrian safety, its parking provision with particular regard to highway safety, its affordable housing provisions, its other infrastructure provisions, the potential benefits of housing and community facilities, and any other substantive matters listed in paragraph 7.4 of the committee report and not covered above. In addition, I will be looking for other information on matters including the status of the existing and emerging development plan, whether the planning obligations in the Section 106 agreement would deliver the promised benefits, and I do also have a few questions on air quality. Just timely to mention that before the inquiry opened, I was passed this statement by the council on air quality. Have the residents' associations been given a copy of that?
So
This morning, like me. Okay.
So can I just mention, if it's not inconvenient, just mention
Please.
that while we're on that topic. As you just heard, it has been distributed now, and that's a statement by Mr. Clive Simmons, who's the Pollution and Safety and Licensing Officer of the Council. In particular, it was to answer the request by Mr. Felt, the Member of Parliament,
yes.
Regarding further information, and Dr. Peter Boffer's comment, him, and I know it's raised by the Rule 6 residents' associations. So at the moment, we're putting it as a statement. If you need assistance on that, then Mr. Simmons will be available and can assist you in answering any questions.
Thank you. That might help.
But other than tomorrow, I'm told.
Right. Well, what I'll do, I've quickly looked through that. I need to cross-reference that with the queries I had before, and then perhaps we can arrange a time.
Of course, yeah.
That's useful. Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, sir.
So,
Thanks.
turning to the time estimates and the programme for the inquiry, I've had time estimates from you, and those are very, very helpful. Thank you. A suggestion has been made that after openings and the presentation, that I should hear from the Residents' Association next. That suits you? Is that all right?
Earlier than we'd anticipated, sir.
Right. Is that a problem? Do you fully understand what's being put forward and the applicants and council's cases?
I think so, except for really going into the detail that they've handed to us this morning.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the details speaking that schedule was actually emailed last week to the Residents' Association, so let's not run with this idea that they've only received it this morning. But so in any event, can I just explain, so as you will understand?
Yes.
So you've, for reasons that I fully understand, asked that we should begin proceedings proper, if you like, with a presentation by the scheme architect of the scheme, and that's going to be his presentation. It would take about an hour going through and explaining how the scheme's evolved and its components and so on. Then, sir, after that, as we have a formal Rule 6 party, the 7 residents' associations that have been referred to, so as you will understand, sir, I am entitled to understand the full case that's being made against my client's proposals before I actually get into calling my witnesses, who are in effect responding to the various points of objection that have been raised. And so that's why I would suggest the right approach would be for after the scheme architect's presentation, for the residents' associations to make their case. I'll have some questions of that. Mr. Morgan may have some questions as well. We'll see how the time plays out, but as you've indicated to us, the MP, Mr. Phelp, will be here, I think it's 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. He objects, obviously, as we know, to the proposals. And there's a synergy, plainly, between the Residents' Association's cases and the local MP's case. Then after that, so I would suggest we just get on with my case, me calling my witnesses and any questions that there are of my witnesses, and then the council's case.
Indeed, whether you have a right or not, that would be helpful to me, because it means that I know what all your objections are and what Mr. Philp's objections are, and I can make sure those are put to the applicant and council's witnesses and they can be properly questioned. Otherwise, if they come first, then you might raise things that they haven't addressed, and then there are complications of recalling witnesses and so on and so forth. However, I would say that if there are, because you, for whatever reason, you were a little bit late in turning to information and you wanted to raise something later on, then if you give me notice, then I'll give it consideration.
Thank you.
Can you tell me now, you've sort of said that you've got a statement to present, but you don't have formal witness proofs of evidence. How did you want to present your case?
I think we don't intend to read every word of it. Sorry. We don't
do you want to borrow one of these?
Yeah,
because
take that one as well.
Both of you are speaking regularly, so see if we can get this all working. And thank you for shouting out that you couldn't hear.
Yeah, thank you very much. We don't intend to read every word of our statement. We will give a general praise of it, and then each one of us will perhaps own some details. I will deal with the transport issues, Dennis architecture, Diane will deal about local community issues, and Phil, when he's here, will deal with other issues as necessary. So Splendid. I think if we deal with it that way, and then we will obviously have questions for the other side on things like architectural value, the transport and things of that nature, and consultation procedures.
Okay, so if everyone's happy with that, what we'll do then is we'll hear the openings. Do you have an opening statement or not?
I can give you one if you like.
Well, it's entirely up to you. It's your case to present how you wish.
Yeah. So when do you want me to do that now?
So, well, in a moment, what we'll do is we'll hear the opening statements then. We'll hear the architect's presentation, depending on how things are going. We may have a break before or after that. And then we'll hear the four of you make your statements and then move on.
Yes, so certainly we will need a few minutes to load the presentation.
Right. Well, that helps me. We'll hear the openings and then we'll take a break.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Splendid. Anything else before we proceed? In which case, yes, gentlemen there. Not the opening statements, no. I mean, this is public, so as far as I'm concerned, anything can be heard and listened to and reported on. My only concern about recording is if witnesses are distracted by it, or if people sort of play to the camera or recorder or whatever. But as long as it's done discreetly. Indeed.
Well, so in fact, everything is being filmed.
Is it? By
so discreet the cameras that you didn't notice.
Right.
Nor had I actually, until someone pointed them out to me. And that's not only because were you in the foyer having a free cup of coffee, you could follow the proceedings.
Right.
But also on the church's website, you can go onto the website, so you could be sitting at home watching the proceedings and listening to them.
Right. Well, I can't because I've got to be here. But
it's same for me. But so if you're not,
it's a nice thought.
If you're not here tomorrow, for example, you can still follow the proceedings. You know. So that's for the benefit of members of the public who can't be here.
So the whole thing's being filmed and recorded. If you want to do your own recording, absolutely no problem then. Right. Please don't tell Mr. Philp that there are cameras. He'll have heard my comment by the time he comes in the morning, won't he? Right.
We'll switch them off especially at that moment.
No, that's fine. Right, so if there's nothing else, Mr. Katkowski.
Yes, thank you. I've got a brief opening. There are actually some printed copies of it. The gentleman who wishes to record, Andrew, if you make sure that gentleman has a copy of it, that might help.
Thank you. I called the air quality statement document 1, so we're now on to document 2.
It's all going to be read out. It's all going to be read out in a moment, so. Right, so if I can make our opening submission, sir, I'll just read through these. In these necessarily brief opening submissions, we will pick out a few key themes of our case, the essence of which is that the Council was right to resolve to permit the proposed development. In large part, the site is an eyesore which blights Purley District Centre, part vacant, part verging on the derelict, brownfield, located within and immediately adjacent to the district centre, town centre here, with excellent public transport. The site is in a highly sustainable location for redevelopment and presents an obvious opportunity for regeneration. Purley Baptist Church's community and church facilities are bursting at the seams, with good people battling to make do and mend with poor quality accommodation, when so much more of their worthwhile work for the community could, and most importantly would, be done if only the church were given the green light to proceed with these proposals. There is so much more that could be made of the site, and so it is unsurprising that the Council has long recognised its regenerative potential. Our proposals for the site have been many years in the making and are the product of a very extensive, rigorous and careful process of analysis and thorough groundwork with, amongst others, the Council, the Greater London Authority, the Mayor, and Transport for London, as well as comprehensive efforts to engage with the wider community. The work that has been done has been painstaking, well thought through, and exemplary. The scheme would provide, amongst other things, much needed new and hugely improved community and church facilities, together with 220 new homes. The many hundreds of people who would live and come here would provide a welcome boost to the town centre's shops and services. The proposals, with their carefully thought through logic and justification, represent high quality design and placemaking. The scheme would transform the site from one which blights Purley to one which instead, by far and away, would be the highest quality modern development in Purley. The proposals are supported by, amongst others, the Council, the Greater London Authority, the Mayor, and Purley Big Business Improvement District. The political campaign which led to the application being called in focused on the tall building which we propose, but it is important to keep in mind that while the slender and elegant tower is a key part of our proposals, we propose a great deal more. The whole scheme would be hugely beneficial. Notably, the scheme is development plan led. The aspiration to provide a tall building on the island site, as it's been called here, has been fostered through the plan-making process, the local plan-making process, from as early as 2013, and the then publication of the preferred options and alternative options paper, that's by the Council. This has culminated with the recognition, I'm sorry about all the jargon, but in local plan policy DM 44.1, in the plan that's going through its process at the moment, and that's the detailed policies and proposals local plan. That plan recognises in that policy that Purley District Centre is an appropriate location as a matter of principle for a landmark tower. So that's the local plan. Now that local plan is at a very advanced stage, and by the time the Secretary of State comes to make his decision, it will almost certainly be an adopted part of the development plan, with all the obvious implications this will have, and I'm sorry about the legal jargon, but under the relevant provision of the Act that you'll be very familiar with, sir. It must not be lost sight of, then, that the applicants have followed the approach urged by government of taking their lead from the plan, by which I mean the local plan. Given the painstaking groundwork that's been done, it should come as no surprise that the proposals accord with the development plan, that's the local plan and the London plan, when read as a whole. The plan makers, namely the Greater London Authority for the London plan and Croydon Council for the local plan, agree that this is the case. Of course, there are those who object to the proposals. The applicants have prepared a schedule, we've already mentioned it this morning, which has assessed the matters raised by the Rule 6 parties, the 7 residents' associations, and which sets out where in the applicant's evidence or in the application documentation the matters raised have been addressed, and replies to the new or elaborated points made by them. The truth of the matter is that the proposed development truly is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Purley Baptist Church has aspired to improve its community facilities and the church for decades, but has been unable to do so despite the overwhelming generosity of many who have donated large sums of money to assist to achieve the church's vision. Through its partnership with the Thornset Group, which has an exemplary track record of delivering high-quality, community-led development, the church now has the chance to realise its aspirations to the benefit of the community at large. It would be a travesty to shun this opportunity. To summarise our case in a few words, the scheme would in every sense act to put the heart of the town at the heart of the town. So those are our opening submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Kakowski. Mr. Morgan.
So I'll give you a typed copy.
Thank you very much. And we're on to document 3.
Thanks, Steve. That's great.
So if it's convenient. I want to summarise the Council's position in 10 relatively brief points. Before doing so, just by way of context, explain the Council's position, which the points I hope will reinforce for the benefit of those in the room, and why they support the call-in application that you are considering. So by way of introduction, the Council resolved on the 15th of December in 2016 to approve the Mosaic Place proposals, and that was after very careful consideration in accordance with the statutory requirement under Section 38(6) of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. The proposals are described in Section 4 of the Planning Statement of Common Ground, and I don't repeat them here, so you've got full references to all those documents. That resolution was subject to any direction from the London Mayor, and on the 14th of March of last year, 2017, the Mayor, in his Stage 2 letter and report, notified the Council that he was content for them to determine the application itself, subject to any action that the Secretary of State may take. And of course, by letter of the 12th of April of last year, the Secretary of State called in the application, and in doing so, he identified the matters that he particularly wished to be informed about. So you have since provided a list, and confirmed that this morning, of those matters that you wish to have heard, and we have dealt with those in our evidence and have identified how that's been done in the Planning Statement of Common Ground, again, hopefully to assist the references given there. I'd just note, sir, for completeness, that the associated listed building consent application, that relates to the removal of a short section of the low perimeter wall within the curtilage of the listed Purley Library and the replacement with steps to adjoining the library forecourt, which you will have seen in the documents. So just for completeness, as I say, that's not yet been determined, and of course it wasn't called in. That's for the benefit of others who may wonder what happened to it, but it's there sitting on the record.
Well, I wondered myself, but I read that statement and left it at that.
Thank you very much. So the careful assessment by the Council at the determination stage has itself to be seen against the backdrop of the extensive pre-application discussions and the consideration that has taken place, as referred to in both the Council's and the applicant's evidence. The Council considers that this has led to a design which is undoubtedly of high quality, with that on the island site, including the 17-storey element, being of exceptional quality, complying with the development plan, as well as the National Planning Policy Framework, the planning guidance, and emerging policy. The basis for this and how the proposals are policy compliant in all other respects is set out in the Council's committee report, the statement of case, and our 3 proofs of evidence. So as I said, at this stage, just summarise our position with the following 10 points. So firstly, both of the 2 sites that comprise Mosaic Place, in terms of the application site, are crying out for redevelopment. Even many of the objectors fairly recognise this and recognise that the site is an eyesore in a key location. Development is required that will address and enhance the hostile gyratory, which the Design Southeast Review Panel itself recognised. And it's hardly surprising, therefore, that the Greater London Authority, the Mayor, strongly supports, and I quote, the regeneration of this key town centre site. So I use the word crying out advisedly because the lengthy and extensive efforts that the current applicants have gone to, together with the unimplemented planning permission, demonstrate that any suggestion that there is a readily acceptable, viable and deliverable alternative to the current proposals needs to be treated with extreme caution, and the applicant's evidence makes that very clear. So secondly, the site has the significant advantage of having a PTAL of 5, that is in terms of public transport accessibility, as you will know. It is also located part within and part adjacent to the Purley District Centre, as designated on both the existing and emerging local plan. So these factors and the pivotal location of the site strongly point to the potential for development of a high density to optimise the development in accordance with national and local policy, including the London Plan. So thirdly, the development potential of the site is recognised in both the adopted and emerging local plans. And as has just been said, the emerging plans are advanced, and that's detailed in the evidence. But the island site is allocated by proposal H85 and under policy H32 of the Croydon Local Plan, 2006, for mixed-use development comprising community uses, a significant residential element, and shopping. And both the island site and the south site are allocated in the local plan, the emerging plan, at CLP2. And again, as been seen from the evidence, it's site 35 for the island site, for uses comprising new church, community facility and residential of 20 to 111 homes, and for the south site, that's site 130, for 77 to 100 homes. And although not site-specific, policy DM44 of the emerging CLP2 states that within the district centre and its environs, development should complement the existing predominant building heights of 3 to 8 stories with a potential for a new development of up to a maximum of 16 stories. Fourthly, the development will assist in the meeting of important planning objectives. So whilst objectors highlight what they see as the negatives of the development, there can be no real dispute that this development would deliver an impressively wide range of benefits. The position of the church use is clear, but the scope of the community benefits that would be available to the public merits very great weight. The development would also inevitably add public activity in the district centre with the clear benefits of that. At the same time, the use of such a well-located brownfield site for making a meaningful contribution to housing, both market and affordable units, is noteworthy. And although the affordable housing is below the policy target figures, a higher level is not viable, as the Council's independent advisors have confirmed. And so the Mayor has accepted this, having taken into account his then draft SPG, which the Rule 6 Residents Association refer to and rely upon. So next, the proposals accord with the adopted and emerging plans and would be of a very high quality design in so doing. So the importance of good design is clear from the National Planning Policy Framework and reflected in the relevant development plan policies as defined in as detailed in Mr. White's and Mr. Lacovara's evidence. And that's including, sir, the policy identified by you, London Plan Policy 77B. Equally clear are the efforts made in this case to achieve a very high-quality design that fits well with its context, recognising the pivotal position and role of the site. The design approach has achieved significant support not only from the Council, as Mr Lacavara's evidence explains in detail, but also from the GLA and the Design South East group. So if the design and all other aspects of the development are considered to be acceptable, the density should be applied flexibly and should not be an impediment to the development. So next, the design is appropriate and acceptable with regard to the impact on the existing heritage assets. So there would, of course, be no loss of any heritage assets, that's designated or non-designated. The impact on the setting of the heritage assets, and in particular the Grade 2 listed library immediately to the northwest of the island site on Banstead Road, has been fully assessed in accordance with Section 66 of the Listed Buildings Act. The Council considers there would be a degree of harm amounting to less than substantial harm to the setting of the library, as again detailed by Mr Lacavara. However, that is clearly outweighed by other considerations as detailed by both Mr Lacavara and Mr White. Any impacts also has to be considered having regard to the quantum leap, as I would put it, in terms of the quality of the townscape that would result compared to the existing and very long-standing state of the site. So seventhly, the development would provide acceptable living conditions for the new occupiers. The new homes would be acceptable in terms of internal space, noise, amenity space, sunlight, daylight, and air quality, as detailed by Mr White. With regard to any flooding risk to the site, this has been addressed adequately in the scheme, and the appropriate body considers the proposals to be acceptable in that respect. And both those matters can, of course, be addressed in the evidence, so it'll be highlighted. So next, the impact on existing occupiers and users of the area. Mr White's evidence explains why the proposals would not have any unacceptable impact on neighbouring occupiers in terms of privacy, visual intrusion, daylight and sunlight, and noise and disturbance. Further, the development will not have any unacceptable implications in terms of air quality, wind and flooding. Ninth, the proposals would be acceptable in terms of highways and parking aspects. So there is no highways objection from TfL, the Highways Authority for the A23 Brighton Road, Banstead Road and Russell Hill Road. Local objectors nonetheless express concern regarding the impact on the busy highway network by increased traffic, as well as the lack of parking. Notwithstanding the number of proposed homes, the impact on the highway network from the addition from the development will be small, as Mr Burton details in his evidence. The restricted parking provision is appropriate and indeed an opportunity not to be missed, given the high PTEL and the good local rail and bus services. This will be reinforced by the exclusion of applications for parking permits by the new residents, as well as the travel plan and car club. With regard to the church use, 50 spaces will be provided, and with regard to times of high demand, which relates in particular to the Sunday services, management measures will ensure that no unacceptable problems arise and there will be available parking in the locality. And finally, sir, an overall assessment of the proposals demonstrates, as we will hope to show through the evidence, that the proposals are not just acceptable, but would meet significant planning objectives. And as Mr White's overall assessment and the other evidence will demonstrate, the proposals are not only acceptable, but to be commended. So
thank you, Mr Morgan. Mr King, do you wish to make an opening statement?
Yeah, if I can make an opening statement. Okay. Thank you. I think our key points are that a building of 17 stories is out of character with the rest of Purley. The existing buildings in Purley, there is only one of 6 stories. They're mainly of 4 and 5 stories, and we believe that it's out of place. We don't have objection to a landmark building, but we don't believe a landmark has to be a tall building. And I think that is one of the key issues. We've also believed that it will have a larger impact than Purley District Centre, which we are very keen to regenerate, on that, but we think it will have a wider impact on the local area. And as our residents associations cover, but not only Purley, but the wider area, we feel there will be a visual and also a pollution and environmental impact on our residents. We also think that the architecture is of not of particularly great architectural design, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration. We believe in the local plan, it talks about a potential for a 16-storey building, not an actual, and that plan doesn't comply with the existing plan, and the new plan has not yet been received approval from the planning inspector. We think there is no requirement to actually build a building of this height. We do welcome the regeneration of the centre and the derelict site, as you have said, which has been derelict for nearly 20 odd years, and we think that we need to move on and do that. We welcome the work that the Baptist Church has done in the local area, and we actually endorse it and support the work that they've done. We think that's very good, but we don't think a 17-storey building needs to be part of it. We also have concerns about issues of parking on site, where Croydon uses the London plan as its basis for parking on site. Now, the London plan has a minimum and a maximum, and the maximum that you can do in the outer zones is clearly you could go as high as 2 car parking spaces per dwelling, which we don't think is right, but you could go to 1. The council chooses to go less because of the PTEL of 5, which we do agree with, although we will come back to that. And our concern is with social and affordable housing. The council chooses to use an even lower basis for on-site parking, and our experience of other parts of this part of the borough is that social and affordable housing have as many requirements for parking as ownership, because predominantly these days people who live in social and affordable housing drive a company vehicle, and we found today that companies do not have depots and warehouses where they leave vehicles overnight. They require their drivers to take them home, and that applies equally to salesmen and commercial people who drive cars as well as light vans. We also, on the issue of transport, we agree that there's a PTEL of 5. Purley has excellent bus facilities. In the transport reports, it really concentrates on the bus service in Banstead Road and Russell Hill, but there is an even better bus service in the Brighton Road, and they have 2 routes that have frequencies of 6 buses an hour. It also talks about Purley Station being local and within 320 metres, which we agree with, but interestingly enough, it talks about 20 trains per hour. Well, that is correct if you say there are 10 trains towards London and 10 trains back, but it gives the implication there are actually 40 trains an hour, and it talks about through trains to Paddington, Brixton, Vauxhall and Waterloo, when in fact all the trains from Purley actually either go to London Bridge or Victoria. In the future they will go to Blackfriars and St Pancras, but at the present time. So I think they've under-egged the buses and over-egged the railway, but we do agree with the PTEL of 5. The possible flooding, we don't think enough work has been done on the potential flood possibilities and problems that could have caused by this dwellings. And Purley has regularly flooded throughout the 20th century and again the start of the 21st century. It flooded severely in 2014, and there is an Environment Agency Croydon report on that from 2015 that a number of measures have already been taken, but we still feel further work needs to be done on that. We also would like to talk about traffic congestion, This is a major gyratory, as everybody has said, of the A22 and the A23, plus 2 local authority trunk roads and 2 minor unclassified roads, but they are still well used, and bus routes, and we also have 1 or 2 minor roads that actually. There have been a number of studies over the last 20 years by TfL and Croydon about the A23, and the 2 junctions that they all concentrate on is the one at Five Ways in the Purley Way and Purley Gyratory. Yet no work has yet been done on the Purley Gyratory since Tesco's were built. And in 2009, Croydon had a report that recommended work on Purley Gyratory to improve the gyratory system and the problems of capacity and congestion that Purley was causing. We appreciate the small shaving of the corner in Russell Hill because that is the subject of a number of incidents where Russell Hill joins the Brighton Road because of the narrowing and offset of the junction, which causes some problems. We then look at the accident rate within the gyratory. Now, I took in our submission the last 5 years up until last year, where there were 27 accidents in the gyratory, of which 11 were in the section in Russell Hill between the Brighton Road and Pamperswood Road. In yours, you put 41 accidents from the 5 years up until 2013, of which there was only 1 accident in Banstead Road, and there was something like 30 in the narrow bit between Pamperswood Road and Brighton Road. And we feel putting an exit onto the Russell Hill, where the traffic is always, I'm sure you can find times when there's no traffic there, but is always blocked because of the traffic lights, and goes back 8, 10, 12 cars in the off-peak, and then goes right back up the Purley Way and around Foxley Lane in the peak.
Mr. King, I hate to interrupt you, but you're going into quite a lot of detail.
Okay.
Did you want to save the detail perhaps for
I'll do that.
your individual presentation?
Yeah, I just make the point that putting the exit there is probably about the worst point in the whole site that you could put the exit. We then come on to pollution, which the council has given us a document this morning. And the pollution, we believe, if you look at the map that the Mayor produced last month, Purley is clearly identified as one of the largest pollution areas in the town centre. And I think that needs to be addressed, and we can address that in detail. There are issues of architectural merit, amenities and all the rest of it, which we can address in more detail.
Thank you very much, Mr. King. Right, well, we'll now take a 15-minute break. Let's make it till 11:15, when we'll hear the presentation. Now, I know I didn't give much notice of this, and it's a difficult thing to do, but if you could try and keep your presentation to the facts of what you're proposing, and then when you get into the merits of it, do that when you give your evidence. Is that possible, or is it a fixed presentation?
Well, so we're going to have to do it all in one go, I'm afraid.
Okay, so be it.
And what I will do, though, sir, obviously, is when I call my witnesses later on after the residents' associations and the MP have spoken, my architect will be one of my witnesses, and if there are any further points that have arisen, I will ask him to comment on those. So the presentation will be about an hour or so. I hope it will be proven useful, will prove useful, and obviously there'll be the opportunity to cross-examine and to ask questions of the architect, but that would be when he gives his evidence properly later on.
Okay, splendid. The inquiry is adjourned until 11:15.
Hello. Yeah, of course you can. Yeah. Make sure it's complete. Yeah. Okay. You're very welcome.
Hello. You've got the sandwiches ready. Nicholson, yeah. No, that's probably a good thing to go to sleep.
Sorry.
There were some new issues actually.
Yeah, there were. Yeah, some odd ones. Yeah.
So, there was one about. Well, I've got them all listed here. But I've got an update on the local plan already on the plan freedom management.
Okay.
And yeah, the thing I was trying to explain with the conditions is that Zena asked, and Rob asked for a Word document of all the draft conditions.
Yes.
So I sent one over, and then she tweaked before and then sent them back. But what I was trying to explain to her was that Word document may not necessarily have been the very final one in the software program. So I need to go through and cross-reference every one. I'm pretty sure it would have been, but there's the opportunity in the software to tweak conditions.
Yeah.
So that's what I was trying to explain. I can't find the email that they sent us.
Ron, any comment on the accident rate, accident record? I mean, I know you've dealt with it. What about these other ones? You talk about 30, the wider area. I didn't really follow that.
Well, I think you were saying 8,027 a year.
Yeah. 11 in Rock, sort of. Yeah. How does the 5 compare to the 11? Maybe you talk about the last one, last one is 27. I thought you said 11 in Russell Hill Road, but I misunderstand that. No, we went through it very quickly. Well, you said one, you said out of the 41. Yeah, no, well, let me give us evidence for time. Because you'll have to respond to it. So. Okay. Any comment on those studies? If not, we can get copies for you. We have quite a lot actually. We can get some. Yeah, cattle. All right. I didn't really get that one. They all go to East Croydon, yeah. Yeah.
Right, that's helpful.
All right.
Well, wait a minute. I thought it was a wonderful description of your skills. Where are we? Not particularly great architecture design. Not particularly great. I mean, that's pretty good going for you, isn't it?
Yeah, no, you're happy with... Yeah, I know, but we can have a good chat tonight and... See, I don't even get on... Well, listen to the you may not even get on tomorrow. We kick off with you first, and I suspect we most will get to tomorrow with you.
Yeah. So.
Be surprised. Right. Who's the lady? I don't know all the characters I know. No.
So you take your time, don't feel rushed.
You all right? I think you're going to be getting some... Any surprise? I mean, I think it was. We know it's pretty... That's why we're taking measures.
Almost great. Almost great.
Yeah, we won't. Yes.
You were trying to solve problems.
Yep.
You have a habit of talking.
So you
Okay.
No. We can put it in the middle.
Please. Simple. Don't hit it with your paperwork.
Yeah.
Either that or put it
Yeah.
in.
Happy to do that. Okay, that might be better. Thank you. Yeah, of course, yeah. That's what we're here for. Try and help. I know you are. I know. Always happens. That's why I prefer the bell.
Oh, right, okay. Come on. That's not going to change. Oh, I see. So
I've been told off.
It's all your fault, Stephen. It's all your fault. I see. Oh.
We're about to restart. I think we are anyway.
Over the road.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, they are very good to speak into it.
Right, could you all take your seats, please? It's not on.
Should be. You're just being switched back on, so.
Right. Could you all take your seats, please? And could somebody close the door? Thank you very much. I have noticed that the temperature's dropped a little in here. I think partly it's the door at the back, but I have asked that it be kept up. Otherwise, note-taking gets very difficult. I would also quickly like now to just run through my best guess at the programme for the inquiry. In a minute, we'll spend about an hour, I'm told. I think that's just the PA settling down, isn't it, on the presentation. And perhaps then we might take an early break for lunch, given that the one or two papers that I need to read, and I know that the residents have had in this morning. We'll then hear from the four of you. You can make your statements and then answer any questions. Little bit of uncertainty as to how long that will take, but I think Mr. Katkowski, Mr. Morgan, that'll probably take the rest of the day. Is that fair?
That feels about right, sir. And I mean, frankly, I really don't know until I've actually heard from the residents' associations representatives, and how long or short they are making their points. So, but it would be very helpful if we could do all of that today.
We'll aim for that. If not, we'll complete it tomorrow morning. We'll then hear from Mr. Philp, who said that he can come in tomorrow morning. He's made quite a lengthy statement, so I imagine that he'll want to speak to that, and there'll be a few questions.
There would indeed be some questions.
So that might take tomorrow morning. We'll then turn to the... Not that long?
No, it won't take that long.
Well, he may not be able to stay that long. Who knows?
That's a shame, isn't it?
We shall see. We'll then hear the appellant's case for the rest of tomorrow and into Thursday.
I should think so, with the number of witnesses that I've got, and again, it depends on how many questions there are asked and so on.
And the council on Thursday. We may wrap up on Thursday, or it may go into Friday. I would also like to, as I said, have a session on the Section 106 and on the conditions this week, which perhaps we would do on Thursday morning. Would that be too soon?
No, sir. I mean, if we do it,
or after the evidence on Thursday.
I think it would probably sit best if it was after the evidence of the applicants and the council.
Are there any particular witnesses that need to come in for that? Mr. Morgan, anyone from the council or county that need to come in for the 106?
Yes, the solicitor who drafted it would like to be present, and I think can be present Thursday. Yeah, I'll double check. So
you can check on Thursday, and,
yes.
and if there's a particular time on Thursday, perhaps we will work around that. If not, it'll be after the evidence. And then I've said next Tuesday I'll hear from the majority of local residents who wish to speak. That may take all day, I don't know. If there are 32, then it might go over into the following day. Does anyone have a problem with that?
Could I?
Yes,
Could I
Mr. King.
Tomorrow afternoon, because my particular interest is transport issues, and I have difficulties with tomorrow afternoon. So will the council and their side be presenting those tomorrow afternoon?
Well,
Mr. Katkowski, can we
thank you, sir.
arrange your transport witness around that?
Transport witness is the fourth in line in my order. I'm tempted to say that I will definitely call her tomorrow afternoon when Mr. King isn't here, but that would be extremely unchristian of me.
And I might have something to say about that.
And you might indeed have something to say about that. And so in those circumstances, I will make sure that I drop her down the order of my witnesses if I need to, so that she comes along on, is it tomorrow afternoon you have
tomorrow afternoon,
right, well I'll make sure
we'll bring her forward, whichever suits.
Either forward or backward in the order, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that warning.
And that will
Mr.
include
King.
pollution as well within the transport?
Well, I haven't got a separate pollution witness. There is a gentleman from the council who's dealing with air quality, and because the council's case is coming after my case, that certainly won't be tomorrow afternoon under any circumstances.
Thank you very much.
Mr. King, when you referred to pollution, did you mean air quality?
I meant air quality from traffic. And
yes.
Yeah.
And so then, one thing you haven't mentioned in the timetable is the question of closing submissions.
Indeed.
Now, sir, I know that there are 3 dozen or so local residents who wish to speak on Tuesday of next week. I imagine we will comfortably do that during the course of the day. There are a number of those who I know wish to speak in support. You mentioned earlier on there were local resident objectors. There are, of course, but there are also supporters.
Yeah.
And so it would be
quite a few.
Thank you. There are indeed. And so it would be, I think, very helpful for all of us if we knew now that closing submissions would be on the Wednesday rather than the Tuesday of next week. And if we do finish a little bit short on the Tuesday, we'll all to the good, because that will help us to with our writing and so on.
Absolutely. My thought was to have the site visits after those, the local
after the residents.
So that would almost certainly be on Wednesday morning. So the earliest would be Wednesday afternoon.
That would be excellent. So if you like, pencil in, say, 2 o'clock on Wednesday for the closings of next week, that would be exceptionally helpful, certainly.
Could I just ask what order the closing statements
in reverse order, so you'll come first,
Thank you.
Then the council, and then the applicants. So, with a bit of luck, we'll draw stumps at the end of Thursday this week, but we may go into Friday, and likewise, with a bit of luck, we'll finish by the end of next Wednesday, but we can go into Thursday if necessary. Any more questions on programme? Right, then Mr. Katkowski, please introduce your witness and his presentation.
I'm going to call Mr. Matthews to deal with the scheme. He's going to make a presentation. We've got a very few copies of these. We'll make sure you've got a copy of the presentation, a hard copy of the presentation, and of course the Residents Association and the authority. There'll be 1 or 2 spare, but every slide is going to come up on the screen and be spoken to. And so you'll see that in your version of this, you have each of the slides, they're numbered. You will see that the source of each slide is given. There's nothing new in this. It's all either from the evidence, that is to say the proof of evidence, or the design and access statement
Should I make this a separate document then?
I think if you marked it document 4, because
I'll call it document 4.
I've already written that on mine. So
Do I need a separate electronic version, or
it's entirely up to you, sir. I mean,
everything that's in here is in other evidence?
It is. I mean, if you wish to have it separately electronically, please just say.
Well, it might help the Secretary of State as well as me. So perhaps, if in due course it could be sent.
Should we put it on a? Or send it through by email?
Yeah, that's probably the easiest. It's not that large, is it?
There are some large images, but I think it's in a PDF format. It will run on a computer relatively easily.
Thank you very much. Right.
Righty-ho, so let me just catch
So
up.
should I turn around and look at the screen, or should I look through the papers and make notes?
Well, sir, I think if you were able to just spin half round, if you like, to look at the screen, it's obviously been set up for you to do that, and for the body of the hall, if you like, to be able to see the screen. Mr. Matthews has been given a laser pointer, which he can point things out on the screen with. There you are. So if that suits you, and we've left in your version of the book on the opposite side of the slide, there's white space. So if you wanted to make notes there, that's entirely up to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Please proceed.
So I shall introduce.
There is one that's double-sided. Can we make sure that the inspector does have the single?
Yes, the inspector is a single-sided one. Thank you.
Do you?
Okay. Yeah. And so what I'll do is I'll just introduce Mr. Matthews to the inquiry first of all. These details appearing at the beginning of Mr. Matthews' proof. That's page 4 of his main proof of evidence. So as you'll know, where the witness introduces himself, and you tell us, Mr. Matthews, that you have various qualifications in architecture. You're a member of the Royal Institute of British Architects and a registered architect, over 30 years' experience in the practice of architecture and urban design, and you set out the nature of your work. You also have various academic positions as well. You're currently a visiting professor at Sheffield University, and you are a member of various design quality panels and a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. You're the founding director of Procter & Matthews, the architectural practice. Now, you very briefly summarise who you are, your qualifications and experience, and you give us some examples of your work and your firm's work at the beginning of your proof of evidence. Are all of those details correctly set out?
Yes.
Good. Now, we're going to have to get the microphone discipline sorted out. So can we just... Do you just want to say a few words into that, just so we can check the level and so on?
Right. Is that appearing in the hall? Doesn't sound like it is, does it? It needs turning up, I think.
Okay, because what I don't want you to do is have to, during your presentation,
yes. I think I'm going to... wants to be turned up a little bit, if possible.
Okay. Jolly good.
Can people hear me now? That's a bit better, isn't it? Okay.
That's a lot better. That's a lot better. So now, with those of us who have the book of slides, we can, if we wish to do so, turn the pages over. But you're going to take us through, you're going to introduce the scheme and give us an overview of its evolution and its components. And I'm just going to say over to you, but I will interrupt if I feel that you're either spending too long on-piste or have gone too much off-piste. So I shall bring you back on track if needs be. So off you go, and
thank you.
Let's see how we get along.
Right, I've set this presentation out in a similar way, albeit abbreviated, to the proof of evidence and the larger design and access statement, which is a core document. So we're going to look at the site and surroundings that have informed the way that we've considered the scheme on the site. Many of you will be familiar with those, but we'll look at them and understand how they have helped us design these buildings. And then we'll look at the urban design evolution. That's about the organisation of massing of the site and the way the ensemble of buildings, because this isn't one building, it is a group of buildings that make up almost an urban quarter. So we'll look at that, and we'll look at the scheme in detail. And this procedure is very much based on the way that we've worked now over, I think, nearly 4 years with council officers, with planning officers, and with the urban design team at Croydon. And so we began by looking at the wider site area so that we could understand the context in which we're working. We are architects that are concerned with context, and I think if anybody's taken a bit of time to look at the proof, or possibly even to look at our website, you'll know that we are architects interested in context and how that informs contemporary architecture. So looking at the wider area here, out to Woodcote, out to Kenley and Coulsdon, was quite an important part of the early thoughts that we were having with the council. In particular, this is the location plan coming in a bit closer. We are talking, of course, of two sites, the island site, shown there in red, the island site and the south side. And in the three-dimensional image to the right, you can see the two sites laid out in red. Now, that image is important to understand that image is taken off a full computer model of almost that whole area so that we can understand the particular topography of this part of Purley and how this building sits and works with the topography. So that's a screenshot from a working computer model that was used throughout the process as an important design tool. And so some of us will know very well the site and its surroundings. So here we have the current Purley Baptist Church, which we're currently sat in up here on the left, the existing outdoor sports court, and then the bottom is a panorama from the gyratory looking north along Brighton Road of the hoardings of the site. And we'll obviously understand more about the site when we walk around it together later in the inquiry. The topography is a significant feature of this part of Purley. And so I think it's important that we do walk further afield so that we can look back down over the valley. The Purley, the gyratory and this site and the district centre all sit at the foot of the valley. That valley has the Brighton Road running along it, and so what we can see of this development and how it operates in townscape terms, both close to and from afar, has been a very important part of the work that we've done together with the council. So there's a view there from the top of Russell Hill Road, looking down towards the site, and another one view from Furze Hill higher up. Now, Purley has some quite significant and interesting buildings of note. Some of them sit within the local conservation area. Some of them are indeed listed. The United Reformed Church, Purley Library, the upper two. The library is obviously adjacent to our site towards the northwest. It's a very important local building. 960 Brighton Road, which faces and will face, hopefully, the entrances to New Purley Baptist Church, is an important building to consider, and of course the Purley Railway Station. And I'll talk a little bit more about how the architecture of Purley, historic architecture of Purley, has helped inform some of the work we've been doing. So this is the side and surroundings. These are present conditions. This is what we as architects call a figure ground, and while it looks like a very simple drawing, it actually is a drawing that tells us a lot. It distills out a lot of detailed information and tells us quite simply about grain and density and form. And so you can see that our site is on a lot of different boundary conditions. To the south east of the site is the large gyratory space. It's over 200 metres in one direction and almost 90 in the other. And then further to the north east, of course, we have the shopping parades on Brighton Road and along Russell Hill Road, where we begin to see much more dense fabric of the town centre, much more built up. And then to the south, along Banstead Road, we can see the more open nature of suburban Purley. And the very large footprint in the south of this drawing is, of course, the very large Tesco superstore, which sits across the gyratory and across from our site. And we can see the railway also down in the bottom right of the picture, very close to our site in the town centre. And so we are also on the boundary of a lot of different uses. You can very easily see from this drawing, commercial retail office, that the land uses change rapidly from one side of our site to the other. We're very much straddling the town centre, and we sit close to residential towards the south-west. So this is a drawing that talks about the very different uses that we have here at the bottom of the valley near the town centre. And building heights in Purley, very important. You can see that we run from single-storey buildings right through to six-storey buildings sitting within the town centre. And the groups of buildings that sit along the parade of shops of Brighton Road and Russell Hill, I've got to point this out because, of course, this is Russell Hill here in Brighton Road. These groups of shops here range from about 3 to 4 stories. We'll see them in the images in a minute, this point here. And so we considered in our analysis with the council sites around the town centre characteristics, how these influence the organisation of built form, existing built form along our site. And we're looking here in red at those mixed-use buildings, early 19th century buildings, coming down Russell Hill along Brighton Road. And this is a view down Russell Hill here. This is at the back, along the Mews here, which serves these buildings and is another mid-block hinterland service yard, really, boundary to our side. And you begin to see in the image on the top right the topography of this part of Purley here, looking east into the hills in the east and driving down to the bottom of the valley. And so this is the nature of some of the buildings that sit around the town centre. Purley Point, which sits on the gyratory here, is one of the taller buildings in this part of Purley. And the senior living accommodation on Russell Hill Road, which is here, Purley Point here. And buildings within the town centre. These buildings are here. This building is here. And so these give you some idea of the built-up nature, the urban nature of that part of Purley Town Centre. And these two add to that picture the leisure centre, which we'll no doubt see on a walk around, which sits here. It's quite a large building footprint in the centre of the town. And Orion Court here, which is F, which is there. New residential building. And then in contrast to that, moving up Banstead Road, we have a more suburban boundary to our site. These are semi-detached buildings here along this part of the road and here. And as you move up the Banstead Road, so these buildings rise up as the embankment rises, and so you have situation here where these buildings sit higher up, and in fact a number of residents have taken control of the forecourts for garages and parking. And then just to complete the picture, if you move further afield up into the hinterland and up onto the hills, then you get suburban housing of this nature, sitting up in Wolvercott and that sort of area. Firs Hill and Promenade Devon, if I'm pronouncing that right. Pedestrian accessibility around Mosaic Place, despite the fact that we do have a lot of traffic around the site, and we've no doubt seen that, and we see that on our visit. Nevertheless, the pedestrian connections are pretty good. There's lots of controlled pedestrian crossings that are activated relatively quickly, and so pedestrian routes into the site are established, and they're there for us to work with and improve.
And I think it needs to be said also that Purley District Centre is a very walkable town centre. It's quite pedestrian friendly. Brighton Road is perhaps quite busy, but nevertheless the rest of the district centre is actually quite friendly to pedestrians. This is down Russell Hill, Brighton Road, within the town centre next to the leisure centre, and walking through the Downland shopping precinct, which links you through this part of the town at that point. And so the gyratory and traffic management around our site is one way up Banstead Road, turn at the top to Foxley Lane, and away up Purley Way, or down Russell Hill to lights that control before you go around the gyratory. So it's a one-way system. And we have also looked, of course, at open space. Purley's particularly blessed with quite a lot of greenery, both private green space but also public green space. And so this slide gives a feel for some of those green spaces. Of particular importance to us is Rotary Field Recreation Ground, which is in about 500 metres of our site. And
you just point that out again because the inspector's making notes. And once the inspector's made a note, so Rotary
Field Recreation Ground here, which is here. Which is an important amenity facility for obviously residents of Purley at the moment, but also for future residents of hopefully this development.
Right, so we're moving now, aren't we, to a different chapter, so to speak.
Yes,
so can you just perhaps set the scene for what we're moving to?
So that's a brief look at the site and surroundings, given in much more detail in other documents, and now we're looking at urban design evolution. Now, this is a strategic concept drawing which looks at the way in which potentially the various aspects of the brief can be distributed on the site. It's a drawing that was used quite early on for conversations with stakeholders and with the planning authority.
And when you say the brief, sorry, just to not assume that everybody understands
the
what you
brief,
mean.
yes.
So
I mean, this is a very interesting brief. It really is a 21st century brief. Architects find themselves dealing with these quite interesting briefs where we have combinations of civic space with residential space. This is this kind of brief. It's a very interesting brief. It's one of our time. This brief has a lot of community facilities in it, as well as church facilities, and of course a good deal of new homes. So it's a hybrid brief, unlike the typologies historically, which would have been separated out, either civic buildings or churches or libraries. This brings together a lot of civic functions with living accommodation.
I think probably just 2 points. First of all, I think if you just perhaps face the inspector and therefore the microphone, and that will pick you up better for the body of the hall. And now that you've done that, can you just help perhaps how typical, atypical, usual, unusual is a brief with these components for an architect and a firm of architects like yourselves?
This is a very unique opportunity, and it's a very unique brief. These are quite rare. This is a rare combination of opportunities to come together in this building. We've done a lot of mixed-use buildings in our 30-odd-year career, but we've never had a brief that's as rich as this, with civic and community space brought together here with a good deal of housing. And so these are quite unique, these briefs, because it's quite challenging to bring these sorts of uses together, albeit that what they offer as benefit is obviously quite considerable. So this drawing here, this concept drawing, is really about where best to think about the most important parts of the site and how we could bring the civic functions to play their role in reinvigorating this part of the site. So if we look at this drawing, for instance, we're already beginning to think that the most visible part of the site, which is at the base of the hill here, and the intersection of Brighton Road and Banstead Road, and seen from so many places, is a very important location for some of these activities. And that at the end of the high street there should be the potential for a new civic place. So embedded in this diagram is a conversation about how the site can support the accommodation, but how that accommodation can enliven and improve the townscape of this part of Purley. Now, at this point, I think we're moving on to the way in which we progressed our design analysis with the council. The council set out very clearly how they wanted to work with us to realise a massing on the site before we move to detail. As we know, the council had undertaken their own urban design studies before we were appointed, and had considered this site, or a site at least close to the gyratory, as an opportunity for a higher density scheme, and also an opportunity, a potential for a landmark building. They felt that a landmark building could work here because it would add to the townscape, it would add to wayfinding, and it would give a presence to the centre of Purley.
Sorry, did you say before your appointment? So
prior to our appointment. And so I know there's been a lot of questions about why a landmark building, but a great deal of thought had been given by the council to the answer to that question. And our job at this stage was to give detail and to, in a sense, to ratify that decision, which we... looks like we're having a technical malfunction, which we did through a series of careful massing studies. So the site was tested through critical close quarter views, which you can see here on the left, looking down Banstead Road, looking down Russell Hill Road, particularly looking along Brighton Road to the site, from Goodston Road through to the site here, and along the Brighton Road looking north. So you can see that if you bring all these views together, and they're shown up here, labelled A, B, C, D, E, all of these, then there are vistas from almost all points of the compass to this point of the site. And therefore the site is critical in terms of its centrality, its central position, but it's also critical in terms of the way it can add to the townscape of Purley. Now, I think it's important to say the council felt that just one landmark building could sit on this site and play that townscape role, and one only.
Would you say one on this site? One on this site? One in Purley generally?
One in Purley in and around this location. And I think it's important to say also that the council were thinking about not only the intersection of all of these vistas and views, but also that this site faces a very significant and large space, the gyratory. And so moving on, the components of the scheme began to then take shape. Here we can see the base of the building, which forms the civic components and stitches the edges of the site together. We can see the courtyard elements that formed the housing, and then the landmark element at the end of the site. So really this little diagram was an early diagram about what might constitute the DNA of the buildings, if you like, this assembly of buildings, to reflect that early concept sketch. And then on this slide, and I won't show you all of these, but there were a considerable number of massing studies done from all of these views for different configurations of plan form. You see the plan there on the left for one of them. I think this was massing study 1. All of these done off the verified model. So our computer model that we saw in an earlier slide was used here to test and continue to test how the form might sit and undertake its proper townscape role, how that form might be lower and squatter, or how we might bring more elegance to it.
So just before you go to the next slide, so in this early stage of your involvement with the site and the potential scheme on the site, for those of us who have looked at your proof, and for those perhaps even fewer who have looked at the design and access statement here, do we see documented there that several massing studies that were carried out, whether it was a tall building by way of a landmark, or even, as you said, squatters, if you like, ground scrapers, were various different ways of developing the site, studied from these various different viewpoints?
That's precisely what was done. Yeah. And I think the important thing here is that townscape and the way the buildings massed and sit in the townscape was the most important part of this design process.
Thank you. And was all of that in conjunction with the council?
All of this is in conjunction with the council, yes. All of this is being tested in workshops alongside the council's urban design and planning teams.
Thank you. And if you go to the next slide, do we see some examples? And these, I don't think these are all of the studies, are they? But
no, these are not all of the studies, but they are the snatch images, all from the gyratory, which show the very different forms and configurations that were tested. I haven't brought all of the views here, but they're all tested from different aspects, so that we could see...
I get the point.
Yeah, okay.
Good, thank you very much.
And then a favoured option, I suppose, was taken to the first presentation, was taken to present to the Strategic Planning Committee. So this was the first option, to give the Strategic Planning Committee an understanding of the evolution of the process, not of the final scheme at all, but of the way in which the team was evolving the design, and obviously to get the committee's feedback. So feedback was given, and the design team and planning team took that away.
And at this stage, if we look at that slide that you've got on the screen while it's still there, the eagle-eyed can see that there is a development scheme in massing terms shown on what's called the island site, but there's nothing at that time, is there, on the south site? Is that right?
That is correct. The south site was not part of the development at this stage, and we will see, just as we go to the third presentation to the Strategic Planning Committee, that the south site is brought into play then.
Indeed, and you'll come to that. So,
yep.
So first presentation to the Strategic Planning Committee, massing, not detail, but massing. Comments are received. Flip on to the next slide. What happened next?
So then the comments were taken away, and the scheme was developed further and presented back to the Strategic Planning Committee. It's interesting to note here that modification to the courtyard, residential courtyard buildings that were now being considered along Banstead Road, they step up from the library. Forms also step up at the roof line, and we were showing at that stage a 16-storey building as a landmark building set over the civic spaces of the church, which can be seen here. Now, interestingly, I ought to mention, I think this image here was an image used early on, I think, in a flyer to object to the scheme. But of course, obviously, this is a scheme in evolution, so I think it's very well worth remembering that, and also remembering that the scheme changed reasonably dramatically from this point to where we ended up. Here, you can see in that image that the tower is much more bulky than the resolution that was eventually arrived at, and I think that's quite important to recognise.
Thank you. So that presentation's made, comments are made by the Strategic Planning Committee, and I was going to ask you what happened next, and where
so at the same presentation, yep. The south site here, at the second presentation, the south site was brought into play, and so the Strategic Planning Committee could see also that we were considering a courtyard arrangement along the Brighton Road and at Banstead Road for the south site, and that seeing the two sites and the way in which they generate new facades and new form along Brighton Road and Banstead Road is quite important. Now, to quickly recap on what was said, the committee felt the landmark element could be more slender, that actually we could go slightly taller, and certainly we needed in the detail to consider further the top of the building, because the top of this building is seen from all around, and it's as important as the lower parts of the building. So we were given encouragement to go and continue developing the landmark nature of that part of the scheme.
So a bit more more slender and a bit taller.
Yes. And then the scheme, following those comments, the scheme was developed a little further. We were beginning to think now about how we could distinguish the architecture of the landmark element. So we're thinking about a tracery facade, which I can talk to you about, give you a little bit more detail as we move into the rest of the scheme. So this is the cluster of courtyards rising to the landmark element and then the civic base to the tower, and it rises to what we then call the campanile, which sits on the end of the Brighton Road parade of shops, which is this line drawing here. We're beginning then in this diagram to think about how we could bring a more landmark nature to the top of the building. And so the building at the top was set back. Here it's shown at 17 stories, it was set back, and a line of trees are set around the top of the building, which sort of reflect the verdant nature of the hills around Purley. And indeed, when you're higher up, you will be able to see the trees on the top of the building, but you can also stand and see right through the top of this building to the sky above. So it sort of dematerializes as it rises to the top.
So if we just look at the caption at the top of the slide, just briefly mention what this slide captures. You say there, presentation to Design South East Review Panel. So far you've been talking about the Strategic Planning Committee of the Council. So what
it captured is a better refinement of the massing here along Bunstead Road, rising from 2 on up to the 17 stories, so it steps as it goes. It establishes clarity to the civic, expresses the civic elements. There's a campanile component here with its own lantern, and then there's the tracery facade which will sit over and distinguish this part of the scheme as a lighter and more elegant element in contrast to the more mass of brickwork that's used on the rest of the project.
And although the inspector will well understand, just for the sake of others, the Design South East Review Panel, is that an independent body of experts, if you like, who...
Yes, Design South East is an independent body that the council employ to give third-party advice.
So you presented the scheme to them, and if you carry on then...
And so the scheme here, this is the elevation to the gyratory, which is set against the rising hill in the back, an entrance to the church at this point. And the comments from Design South East are important because I think they were interested in the way we could actually expose the top of the tower even more, give it an even more landmark quality, if you like, and lower the campanile element so that it read more in relation to the Brighton Road and became a townscape element in its own right, terminating the Brighton Road parade of shops.
So you just pointed it out. So the review panel recommended that they, or opined that the campanile elements, which you're going to point out now...
The review panel felt that the top of the building was a wonderful design aspiration, and that it could be improved further by dropping the campanile, which we agreed. That lost accommodation, but nevertheless it improved the separate, elegant nature of the tower, and it improved the townscape role that the massive campanile was playing with the Brighton Road parade of shops.
Very much indeed. Thank you. And so, having presented to that panel, having had their comments back, having thought about them and so on and so forth, what happened next?
And so the third presentation to the Strategic Planning Committee is shown here. We're looking now over the gyratory here on this, at Bunstead Road. We can see the stepping of the pavilions. We can see the base of the building with the church, the landmark element, the cap of the building with the trees. And we can also see here Russell Hill, and the way the buildings are articulated to carry the Russell Hill facade through, then the new civic space and the entrance to the church below the prayer room, and the reduced height of the campanile at this point here. And so this now exposes the top of the building to all around 360 degrees.
And everything you've been describing so far, is this all, including this, is this all prior to the planning application being made?
It's all prior to the planning application being made, yes, absolutely. This is all part of the process of consultation with the planning committee.
And although we are compressing it into a few minutes. Does this represent years of work?
This represents years,
Yes.
years of work, yes. Yes. I think it's important to say that the third Strategic Planning Committee was a very good one, and we received a lot of support and a lot of praise for having taken on board the various comments. The next slide then is artist's rendition of the way in which the landmark building now is perceived along, looking east along the Banstead Road, with the library in the foreground here, seeing the trees at the top. These trees exist here. And this along the Brighton Parade, looking south, Campanile rising to this point with its lantern, and the taller landmark building shown behind, and of course that comment from Design South East allowing the treetop fringe to this building to be exposed for all to see. And so we went on then to refine the proposed massing and to start to think about architecture, which I'll be moving on to soon. So we have, just to recap, we have a clear base which expresses the civic functions of the building. We have pavilions which reflect the scale and organisation of the semi-detached buildings that are opposite and form a street line to Banstead Road. We have a campanile that sits on the end of the Brighton Road and also establishes a new civic space at the base for entrance to the church, a middle section with the residential accommodation, and of course the taller element, which is the landmark tower. And it's important to say now that the plan is becoming more established, that we look back again at the public realm. This project does offer a significant opportunity to improve the public realm in this part of Purley. I think it's important here just to pause and say it's been suggested that the development is cramped.
Well, the Residents' Association statement says that you've built up to the site boundaries and it's cramped. So can you just correct the record on that while we've got the slide? Is it built up to the site boundaries? Is it in fact more?
No, in early conversations with TfL and with Transport and Purley Planning, we've moved our building away from our boundary along Banstead Road, so we widen the Banstead Road pavement quite considerably, allowing planting all the way along, and there's a very detailed planting design and access statement by Philip Cave, landscape architects. This allows pull-in spaces along the Banstead Road, and it allows our buildings to be pulled away from that road. Also importantly, and I'll talk about it in a minute, it allows a better connection to the listed library, so that public realm is more continuous. Of course, there's a new civic space here in the corner of Russell Hill Road and Brighton Road. And there is shared courtyard spaces which we can see here, and in our two courtyard spaces here and here. So I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding about the cramped nature of the site. It offers quite a bit of amenity to residents, but it also offers quite a new and improved public realm to the whole of Purley. And of course, what's important about this brief is it allows us to activate street frontages in a way that architects simply can't do with just simply residential buildings. I think that's why it's such an important combination of uses for this particular site. So the image here is showing you the civic space, the prayer room that sits over the entrance to the church, but it shows you the transparent nature of the frontages that we're going to be creating, or hopefully creating, at the end of Russell Hill Road and at the end of Brighton Road. So it is a proper new civic space, it's a proper extension. And I think it's important to add that the church is, their brief to us is that they want to be much more transparent, much more open to the public. This is a public space, a public building. And so there are not just one entrance, there are quite a number of entrances we'll look at in a minute. And then along the Banstead Road, the leafy character there, again, active frontage to the church here, all the way round. Active frontages of the residential that look over this, but pulling the buildings away allows us to add to the landscape along there. And Banstead Road is a leafy road, and so this is the right way to treat our side of the street and reinforce that landscape character. Now, at the moment, the library, which is the most important building close to us, it's grade 2 listed, it's quite a fine building, is entered off Banstead Road at this point here. And there is a low listed wall that doesn't allow, once we've moved our pavement back, it doesn't allow people to make a direct connection to this quite pleasant public realm that exists in front of the library. And so in quite early conversations with the planners, we devised to pull our buildings even further away at this point and to allow a proper stepped connection organised by our new buildings up to the library forecourt and in at this point here.
And is that a product of the ability in a new scheme to push the building line back?
It's a product to push the building line back so that it's aligned with the front of the library here and it doesn't step forward of the library, so when you look down the Banstead Road, these have a proper role to play in line with the library's gable at this point. But it widens the pavement at this point, makes it better for residents to enter. They've got a bigger pause space to come into the building.
Yeah, there's a little sign telling me that you're going to power down in a few seconds, so I don't know what we need to do to make sure that doesn't happen.
Powering down.
We're just about to get to the scheme itself, and it'd be a terrible shame if everything went blank, but there you are, let's see what happens. I can't read even with my specs. That's a projector, is it? Oh well.
Is the projector going to power down?
Happy days. Carry on, let's see how much we get before we lose.
20 seconds, I don't know what you do with the projector to stop it. Mike, if you come and have a
Give me a chance to have some water.
It's about to power down, which sounds ominous. Unless you've been preset, so you have to stop in a few seconds' time. There you are. There you are.
It has, it's powered down.
It has powered down. See, eagle eyes here, eagle eyes. All these lovely people are volunteers, so we're trying our best to... No pressure.
So that looks about perfect for your hour.
Yeah, there or thereabouts. It will be a bit longer. Yeah. It's just, that is assuming we can start again. So. Poor Mike. It wouldn't be the same if there wasn't a glitch of some kind. So.
Looks like it's coming back.
Oh, here we are. Marvellous, something's happening. Ooh, look, we've got a timer.
There you go. You've probably got another
half hour. Okay. So just finishing off then, you can see how the two-storey pavilion of our building here is related to the height of the library and how the new wall connects and locks together. So we very much see our building as part of a townscape along Banstead Road, which is a part of the library's configuration. And of course, the choice of materials and colour hues are all related to that. We'll look at that in a minute in the detail. So I'm now moving on to the scheme in detail. So once we'd established the way in which we thought best to organise the massing and accommodation on the site and the landmark structure, we moved into considering an architectural language for the buildings. The inspiration to some degree for the tower comes from the Torre Granigi, which is a very famous tower in Lucca in Italy, and we felt that ours being a residential tower, nevertheless, that the treatment of the building could be as important and have the same sort of landmark quality, particularly if this was going to be the only tallish structure in Purley. then we agreed entirely with the planning authority that it needed to be a very special building. So these are the components of the tower again, just to recap: the tracery, the Scots pines that sit on the top, and the organisation of the perimeter base and campanile with its tracery element. And we're looking now at the rendition of that in a CGI along the Brighton Road shopping parade. That image there on the right of the two.
So you're now going to work through each of the main elements of the scheme in a bit more detail. So you're starting with what you've described as the base.
So the components are really, just to recap, on the base. So this organises the streetscape. It gives reference to Purley's, the civic nature of the space is set on 3 floors and a basement floor of the community and church uses. And this is the base and the pavilions. So these are pavilions which express across the street and break the mass down as we move along Banstead Road. And so as you move along Banstead Road, you have views back into the landscape courtyards. This is a device also that gives more privacy from the road to the residents that will live around these courts. And then in the detail of the scheme, we have sculptural elements, and so as you move around the scheme, you become very aware that there are civic and community functions, church functions happening in this building, because there are sculptural components in the detailing of the facades.
So if we just pause there, I think it's going to be one of those mornings, isn't it, or afternoons. Your laser, I think, is packed up now. But if we look at the, oh, well done, it's back. So the baptistry is one of the sculptural
So, for instance, one of the sculptural elements is the baptistry, which signals the entrance to the church from the Banstead Road side. There are several entrances to the church.
So that element there, the baptistry, I think currently the baptistry, if I've got this right, is there. Under there. So with the scheme, you've taken the opportunity to introduce a...
Yeah, and there are bay windows that sit in the frames here that are into the auditorium. So the articulation becomes more. There is more detail occurring along the two-storey civic frontage, so that you become quite aware that there is that sort of function happening within the building, that there is an importance to this.
Does that all help to activate the frontage of the...
Indeed, and it's also about distinguishing what is civic from what is residential, which I think is an important, needs to be reinforced in the language of the architecture.
So that was the Banstead Road side, so to speak, of the scheme. With the next slide...
And the next slide is really, again, it's about sculptural elements. If you look here, this is the bottom of Russell Hill, where we have a civic space. We can see that in the image here. And that then it has a prayer room, which is pulled out of the plan and expressed as a sculptural component that sits over the principal entrance. So these are devices that are used to signal entrances and also to give reference to important spaces within the church. And then the courtyards are facades set back from the frontage. They're generally treated with lighter brickwork, so they recede away from the frontage, and that provides more light into the courtyards. So there's quite a rich series of components to this assembly of buildings, and it's supported by then the selection of materials, which we'll look at in a minute. The tower, as we said, is distinguished further by a sort of tracery facade. This gives it depth. We're not interested in making a building that looks like a commercial building. This is a residential building. We think residential buildings should have detail and concern for detail that distinguishes them and gives them domestic quality. So we were considering materials here in brick, Brighton Road, the way stone is used, and the way tracery is used here on the United Reformed Church. How might we use the detailing around the town, the language around the town, to inform a contemporary expression of a residential tower? It was always said that if we were going to have a tall building here in Purley, that it needs to be special to Purley. It can't look like anything in Croydon, it can't look like anything, indeed, in any other part of London. And a crown is opened up even more so that as the frame rises, the crown is open to expose the fringe of trees. And the image there is along Brighton Road where you see the fringe of trees and you see the sky through the tracery. And you see the tracery opens up as it gets to the top of the building. So it lightens the building as it moves through to the top. And so this elevation here along Banstead Road puts all of that into a little bit more detail and context. We have the pavilions that are held in a wall. There's also a full stop to the facades in the courtyard. These are these here. And then pavilion entrances built in brick, but they're the clear entrances to these mansion block typologies, really. They sort of take their cue from very successful mansion blocks of London. And so you enter into the courtyard and then on into the cores and then on into the dwellings. We're interested in the way thresholds are used in urban architecture, historic urban architecture, to foster proper residential community. So you see another entrance here to the courtyard there. So the pavilions rise 2, 3.5, 5.5, 7, and then finally you can see the expression of the two-storey civic component to the church, the baptistry here, a large double-height opening to the church entrance, lined with tiling, and then the lighter tracery of the tower that sits over the top of that, expressed separately.
It is.
Is it? Sorry.
It's gone, I think. Oh, it's back.
Yes, I think it is disappearing. I think you're right. Not sure
Maybe
what
the
I can...
batteries. I think there was a spare battery in the tin, but the gentleman has some other...
Mike, do we have another laser pointer here?
We've got some batteries. Some batteries. In the tin itself, there's some batteries.
I think it is useful, the laser pointer, isn't it?
Oh yeah, look, there's a battery. There's some batteries there. This is my main role here as coordinator of other people doing things. I hope this isn't going to be docked from your time, Mr. Matthews.
I think we're all right.
We are, we're fine. We're absolutely fine. I think one thing we can say about the timetable of this inquiry is we've got plenty of time to take our time. Mercifully.
Stand on the spot, but I think
Battery out.
it's tricky to get them.
Tricky to get them in. Really? Takes 3 batteries.
Mr. Matthews, do you want to just point on the screen while the laser display board is being sorted out?
Shall I go up?
Yeah. Yes, you can.
Okay, so what I was explaining is how the pavilions are locked into a brick edge. These are the components of the facades that express themselves as entrances into the courtyard. There's a pergola here that forms a green screen as you move across here. That's the principal entrance that is your address if you live in this courtyard mansion block. And then as you go up, it starts to rise. There's another courtyard expressed in the same way. And then finally, the brickwork here is resolved then in the base that runs around and establishes that civic place. Now, within the larger frames of the church, then we have different, more precise detailing that's expressive of the nature of the activities that are taking place. So there's a very clear frontage to the street, lighter brickwork set back to the courtyards. So we have a courtyard topology, but we still have a continuity of streetscape. And now I was talking about how the language of the architecture then changes to the tracery of the tower and the way the tower actually lightens up as you move to the top of the building. So it looks like it's working again.
You're back. You're back. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for that.
There are 3 tiny batteries in this apparently. So Right, next slide. Here we are. Go on, off you go.
And so I think it's important that we do look inside. I know there's a lot of emphasis on what the building looks like and the landmark element. I think it's important we look inside at what the building is offering, particularly to the church and the community. This is the ground floor. You can walk right through from Banstead Road, through a double height entrance space, into the entrance foyer. It's gone again.
What a nuisance. I think what we're probably going to...
Matthews, you were doing very well standing there.
I think if you take your clicker as well and off you go.
I wanted to take this.
Microphone. Yeah.
How am I going to do this?
I know, I don't know how you're going to do it, but give it a whirl, you may see.
Okay.
We can do the clicker if that helps.
Sorry?
We can do the clicker if that helps.
Oh, you can. Of course you can.
Yeah.
You can do the clicker.
And if we feel you're going too slowly,
I need another arm.
Quicker, you see,
So there's, as I said earlier, the church is wanting to be open, and so we have a major principal entrance. This is the one beneath the baptistry that routes through to the foyer. The foyer is a triple height space. There's a cafe that faces the new civic space at the end of the high street. This is the principal route in. There's a retail unit onto Russell Hill Road, a multi-purpose hall, which can be separated and split into smaller units. There's a kitchen that serves that, reception. And the Purley Cross Centre is right at the apex of the site with its own entrance, separate entrance from the street, so it can operate independently of the church, but it's also, of course, connected to the church. We have a mews entrance at the back, separate mews entrance for drop-off from the space at the back of the Russell Hill shop. So, next slide. And then going into the basement area, there's quite a lot of servicing space because we have combined heat and power plant, which is part of our sustainability installations for the building. But down there is a multi-purpose double-height sports hall with changing facilities for youth sports, etc. Next. And then at the first floor, moving up then to the first floor, this is the baptistry, the sculptured nature of the baptistry, which is connected to the large auditorium. This can sit in a gallery and at this level approximately 450 to 500 people. Principal circulation is understood through the building from the foyer, so everybody's very clear where they are all the time in the building. Circulation is at the kind of knuckle of all of this activity. There's the usable space, office space for Purley Baptist Centre, and then the dedicated prayer room, which is expressed out to the civic, which clearly is a marker to the entrance to the building and reflects what the building's about. Purley Baptist Centre, usable space, also here facing the Brighton Road. Now this little drawing here then is a little rendition of what the nature of the main auditorium space is like. It's a very flexible space for all sorts of different activities, both for the church and, of course, for the wider community. Next, please. So we're moving up to the second floor activities. There is more office and usable space. Then we move into residential accommodation here, which is separated from the church, foyer space, the gallery that sits around the main auditorium space, focused on stage at this point. This is where you see the canted bay windows that are expressed through the frame that we see on the Banstead Road elevation. And then if you go up again, above this space, there's a plan here which shows you the rooftop landscaped amenity that's available to the community as well, that looks down over Russell Hill. So that gives you a brief idea of the very significant amount of space and offer that is going to be available in this building. Okay, next please. This is a slide really that was just to establish what I've talked about, but about very clear entrances, so that in urban buildings we have proper clear addresses for groups of people that then move through thresholds, so that there is a proper transition from urban place through semi-private courtyard to private dwelling. In our opinion, there's There's a great lack of that in contemporary housing in London. You walk straight into a core, you go up to your flat. We were very interested in exploring. The council supported us, proper mansion block typologies for the residential accommodation on this site. So this isn't about maximum gross to net. This is really about proper community residential living accommodation. So that's that slide. Next slide shows then the more grand and expressed entrances for the accommodation, living accommodation in the landmark building, and the way in which Purley Cross is a part of that, the entrance to Purley Cross at this point. And we can see close up there of the entrance at the base of Russell Hill into the main church auditorium. Next. So just to say something about the nature of the accommodation, all of the apartments have inborn balconies. They don't have balconies that stick out. These balconies are amenity space which is much easier to use. You can use it seasonally, so if it's raining in the summer you can still use the balcony. Principal accommodation, principal rooms, living spaces face out and into the courtyard. And you'll see that the bedroom spaces are pulled further away from the busyness of the Banstead Road. So these are all carefully planned to give the best living accommodation. And also there's an active elevation even to the Mews or service space at the back of Russell Hill. We see this eventually as a proper cobbled space, and that this project is an opportunity to perhaps encourage owners of the buildings on Russell Hill to make great improvements to that public environment as well.
Before the slides flip on, so because the inspector probably hasn't had the chance to see this yet, but can you just make that point about the Mews, because there might be some confusion where Russell Hill Road is.
This is the parade of shops onto Russell Hill Road. This is a sort of service yard and Mews which we can walk into. It's a bit tatty at the moment, but eventually it can be. And there is a possibility at some time in the future to make a connection. So the scheme is not closing that down, it's making that possibility happen in the future.
And the other point why you've got that slide is certainly the residents' associations in their statement of case have suggested that the play space for children and so on and so forth is a high level on the rooftops of the scheme, and they raise criticisms about that, and it may very well be, but it looks 100%
I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding about where amenity space is. These courtyards are shared amenity space for the collections of dwellings around them. They're places to be.
What level are they? What level?
They are set above car parking at half level. Right. That does two things. It helps us create a strong street frontage. People still have a glimpse into it. It privatises these more, so they're more usable and they're more connected to the residential accommodation. But these landscapes are set at the same level as the ground floor. Have we got a pointer? Okay. Laser. Oh, there we go.
Oh, even better. You prefer to be down there. You prefer to be down there, do you? Okay, jolly good. So rather than the children's floor play space being on the rooftops, are they? But not even on the first floor, half level.
No, they are set at the level of these apartments here. So these are both addresses and entrances, places to gather, places to look into, and places to play in, all set at those levels. And you can see the play spaces are here.
Okay, thank you very much. You can now. Do you want your clicker back for the slides? You make this a one-man show now.
I've got to catch up to where I am.
You're on page 55.
Yeah. Okay.
So one more slide. So click on.
This is taking a while to load, but and so then these are the upper levels, and you can see the apartment plans focused around these courtyards. Again, inborn balconies and bedrooms sheltered from this aspect of the road. And then as we go higher, lowered sections at the back of the courtyards, allowing light into the yard at the back of Russell Hill Parade of Shots, but also importantly allowing light back to the existing residents. And then we see the first plan of the lower part of the landmark tower.
Whoops, the drawing's just taking a while to load, but as we work our way up the tower, do we have the tall building element? Do we have 4 apartments or flats on each floor?
So each floor, 4 apartments until we reach the 13th floor, where we have, where there's 5 there, 4 when we reach the top of the campanile, and then just at the top 2 maisonettes, which sit right back around the fringe. And important to note that they again have balconies that are all captured as part of the fabric of the building.
And so are they, in the tower, are the apartments dual aspect, and indeed when we get to the very top, do we...
They're dual aspect. Well, actually, they're all dual aspect. All these are triple aspect apartments.
Okay.
They have balcony spaces, amenity spaces at 2 levels, and there's a triple height section, open section in this part. So again, in 3 dimensions, you'll see views through the corners of this building.
Very much indeed.
Which, of course, is difficult to depict in an elevational drawing like that.
Thank you. So we're on to private amenity space. So you've told us about the half-level courtyard children's play spaces, which are shown on there.
Which is shown in this elevation here, yeah. But I think it's important to say that the building is about the expression of the tracery, and it's about proper usable amenity. So here in the corner balconies, these are tucked in as part of the building, so they're much easier and more sensible to use rather than sitting balconies out of the building, which is a cheaper thing to do, interestingly. And we do exactly the same with these apartments. They have inborn balconies, which means you can use them seasonally, and particularly you can sit out in the summertime when it's raining, they can be used.
So although it's cheaper to stick balconies externally, as we see, in fact, in modern developments, as you walk around Purley, you can see that.
Yep.
But here, they're all, I think you've used the word inbound, have you? So
they're all part of the fabric of the building, so they're covered.
Yeah.
And therefore they become more extensions of people's living rooms, particularly in taller buildings. People can use amenity space much more successfully if they're configured architecturally in this way, even though it actually costs more to build buildings like this. But actually, I think it enables us to create a much more interesting building, an interesting facade.
Right. We can move to materials, I think, yeah.
And so I said earlier that our analysis of Purley's architecture had informed us in terms of material choices. The library and the proportion of the fenestration in the building on the library you see has tall, was Georgian proportions to its windows. Stone and brick, the brick, brown, red brick hue is used. Terracotta is seen in Purley, as is lighter brick, and of course the stonework is seen, this buff-coloured stone is seen on quite a number of buildings. So there's a rich list of materials used throughout Purley, even though it's a fairly eclectic town in terms of its architecture. There's a rich list of materials which we can draw on to develop a sort of contemporary architecture for this location. So the scheme in detail, this is extract, a larger extract of the elevation to the church with the tower and the tracery, which has great depth to it. So this element is not flat glazed commercial architecture, which is used both for residential and commercial buildings. It is.
The Residents Association have said of your, for some reason they've picked up the windows, the fenestration, they've described them as bog standard 1970s commercial, which
yes, I've written
I think
that
they
down,
probably don't mean as praise, Mr. Matthews. So I wonder whether you can just set the record straight. We do actually have the actual planning drawings, which should we achieve a planning permission, are at, is it
A1 and A0.
And
I think some of the issue is that people tend to look at planning applications at either A4 or A3, and indeed we're even looking at the screen today and we can't see the kind of detail that is available for people to see on the planning drawings, which show considerably more detail that was discussed again in depth with the planners. For example, and I think I'll show it on the next slide, I mean this is a reconstituted stone, canted stone facade, which will actually create quite a lot of modelling. At the entrances we've got terracotta tiling used. I mean, an opportunity in this building, fantastic opportunity to employ artists to help us augment this architecture at that civic level. And we can see perforated brick here being used to the baptistry and perforated brick here to the projecting bay windows. And then these fenestration to the residential buildings are set back within a taller frame, and in there we pick up on the herringbone detail that you see throughout the town, particularly in the gables of the Russell Hill buildings. And I think the next slide, again, you see, you can't see it on the slide, you need to look at the drawings, but here...
So you're just pointing out with your pointer there.
Yeah, there's the herringbone pattern that contrasts with the smooth stretcher-bond pattern of this. And then, of course, we're using soldier courses as well to distinguish these, all of which can't really be seen on this. So this is quite a rich, crafted building, and we're interested in the way craft is used to give expression to architecture, contemporary architecture, and how it's used actually to give expression to domestic buildings, domestic quality.
No, so I don't know, and I don't think that within the papers that you've actually got these drawings at the size they would be if permission is granted. We've got them certainly at A3. Now, we do have some of these drawings at their proper size, and if you would like to look at those at some point, just for example to understand the point that's just been raised, because criticism made is this is cheap and cheerful and not very good architecture, and you can understand the architect has very different views about the matter, and a lot of the detail can only be picked up when you look at the drawings at their right size. So would you...
Well, I think it would help. I mean, what I can do on screen is to blow the drawings up.
Of course you can.
Which does help. But I think it might help me as well if you could pick out just a few of the larger drawings from the set there. And then I can look at them and double check that I can get to that level of detail satisfactorily.
Well, when we come to lunch, sir,
if you could do that.
I think we've got a tube which has got at least one of the drawings, relevant drawings, at the right size. And perhaps if you glanced at that and told us whether you found that helpful or otherwise, and if so, we can produce a set of a few of the most relevant drawings.
I mean, I even did this drawing, blew this up this morning in the hope that we could see the herringbone pattern, but I think the nature of the screen and the projection means you can't see that in here. But it actually it brings texture to the building, which is important.
Okay.
And then we'll step around the scheme as submitted to the planning application, the final elevation to the gyratory here. You can see quite clearly now the expressed element over civic bit of the church. And
this is page 61, so if you're catching up.
And the prayer room sitting over the entrance. And the campanile, which is given a more mass, so it has kind of more medieval quality with canted openings into it. So it's contrasts with this, and then it picks up this detail here with a tracery on its face to look down Brighton Road.
Thank you. That's a gyratory, and then we come to Banstead Road elevation, which
again, the final Banstead Road elevation showing how the brick is used, same colour as the library, is used to form the street edge as it climbs through those pavilions, and then the landmark building sits on that base.
Thank you.
Clear entrances to the residential accommodation.
And the Russell Hill, when it comes into focus, so do we see there from that slide the fact that a large part of the scheme on the right-hand side of the slide, as on the screen, is actually behind the Russell Hill
that's set quite a long way back because it's on the yard at the back. So this is a pavilion. It echoes the nature and scale and fenestration of the ones we saw on Banstead Road. So as you descend Russell Hill, these buildings continue that frontage until at full stop of the church entrance, and then the campanile with its tracery cap, which is culminating the base of the building and looking back down the Brighton Road.
Thank you. And now we move to just briefer, because But we move now to the south site, so design approach.
So the south site, the design approach was very similar. However, the architecture for the south site is deliberately calmer, simpler, so that it doesn't try and compete with the landmark component. And it's obviously a lower scale building. It completes the corner of Banstead Road and Brighton Road. It has a base, a configured courtyard. There is a bookend to the two wings of the courtyard here onto the gyratory and at that intersection. So this is the site plan. We rise to 7.5 stories here, 5.5 here. It's 3 at the back, and I think 4, it should be marked on here, 4 and 5 here.
So in the slide, as you've got it in front of you in the book, so you can see the stories are marked. For some unknown reason, we've never been able to get them onto the slide.
Never understood that.
I have no idea why, but there you are.
But in the same way, it climbs like the island site.
Yeah. So the inspector's just checking that you can see that there. I've got that.
So it's 4, 5, 7.5 as it comes along.
Yeah.
Wraps around. It also steps back to retain an existing tree, listed tree, and it retains groups of trees on the boundary here.
Yeah. Okay.
And again, I think the same inspiration in terms of material qualities have been used for this building. The building is also framed with a series of loggia elements which hold the balconies, and it's framed to be scaled similar to the rhythm of the semi-detached houses as they rise up the Banstead Road. So again, it comes down, it has a similar scale to the first semi-detached dwellings, and then rises to the larger gyratory, the corner here. These then are the final planning elevations. The Brighton Road elevation, 7.5 stories here, 5, 6 here, and then as it steps down along, so that's the bookend at the corner as it steps down along the Banstead Road. Again, balconies are set within the architecture, so they're framed by loggia components, pavilion components. And so this is the two schemes together set in context, looking...
wait a minute, hold on, what's happened here? Have you skipped a slide on with your clicker?
No, that one's comes next.
Okay, jolly good, they're just in a slightly different order.
Sorry, slightly different order.
Okay.
So this is the scheme in context. The south side with its bookend, very clear perimeter block building really to deal with the corner and to contain a protected courtyard for the residents. Again, it's very clear here that these are modelled on the same rhythm as this. And then the island site and the landmark building set across the road. Now, interesting, this slide shows the LiDAR survey modelled, and so you can see how the landscape in the background rises up Russell Hill Road, what the topography is like in the background. And you will, if you go east of this and rise up the hill to the east, you will see this landscapes and our building set against it in that way. So the south site contains a courtyard, quite a large courtyard, with apartments looking into it, a landscape frontage retained tree. Parking is pulled off away from Banstead Road. And again, like the island site scheme, this scheme is proposing quite significant improvements to this part of the Banstead Road, public realm improvements.
And just on the very bottom of the slide, so to the left.
Yep, here.
There.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Can you just explain
There's a separate play space for 1 to 4-year-olds that sits here.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you very much indeed.
And so that is a CGI of that inner courtyard and the way that landscape architects has treated it to make a shared space, but also to make private spaces for those lower apartments. And of course, these apartments look into that space as well, enjoy this space as well. and the privacy that it offers. So the CGI of the way the scheme sits on the corner. It's using banding that's been picked up from elements of the architecture we've seen around Purley, stone banding, and then lighter treatment to the pavilions, so they're silhouetted against the red brick.
And your closing slide, and you might just, with the closing slide on the screen, want to say a few words to draw it together, and you might just want to say something about do you remember the Residents' Association's opening remarks from earlier on, where the scheme was described in, I think, not particularly glowing terms as not particularly great architecture. So now's your moment to...
nearly great, then.
Nearly
not
great.
particularly great, but nearly great. Yeah.
In that way, actually, but perhaps once the scheme is understood, that might help with one's commentary about it, if one actually looks at the plans and so on. But would you like to say a few words to just draw it all together, please?
I mean, for us as architects, it offers a unique opportunity, this brief and the site, to create a new civic place and to dramatically improve the public realm. And we're architects interested in context, not in copying context, but using context to inform contemporary townscape. And I think we were selected for the site because we have a track record in not only designing and massing buildings in townscape terms for these sorts of sites, but actually in taking this scheme all the way through to the detailed design. And I think it's, you see, if you look at the larger scale drawings, you can see the crafted nature of what we're trying to achieve with this ensemble of buildings, because it isn't just one building, it's actually a new urban quarter. And how you give an expression to both the civic buildings, but also give a domestic scale to places that people are going to call home is a great opportunity. So it is a building that we think can bring new focus to the community, can bring new social activity, and it is a pivotal site, it's a catalyst site. And I think the council are quite right to say that it is a site in which a landmark building can act as a new piece of townscape, to give focus to Purley's town centre, to act as a wayfinder and to act as a positive piece of new urbanism. I mean, historically, a site like this would perhaps have had a church spire or a clock tower. In our century, we have these buildings to make similar gestures and to improve townscape, and that's what we believe we're doing.
Good. Indeed, thank you, Mr. Matthews.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious that I've got a bit of reading. I don't know how the residents' associations have got on, but if we just add a little bit to lunch and break till 2 o'clock. Over the lunch break, if people could try and keep the doors shut, that might help, and I don't know if anything can be done to keep the temperature up.
I asked about this yesterday, so I was told that when the temperature drops to single figures, those in this room suffer. And that's, and it's as simple as that, sir.
I'll be gone and before then and rearranging the venue to Croydon Council offices. So I hope it doesn't drop. But I'm sure if people keep the doors shut, then that would help. So we'll adjourn until 2 o'clock. The inquiry is adjourned.
Thank you, sir.